There are only two emotions in prison, anger and fear. And one morning, when breakfast was still cooking, I encountered them both. I was the kitchen clerk at the time and enjoying one of the few solitudes I had in prison, a sweet cup of coffee. Yes, fresh brewed. That was one of the perks that came with working in the kitchen. Brewed coffee. Not that instant main compound chewing tobacco water, but that fresh, semi-sweet aroma of free world coffee. It was in those early morning hours when most of the prison still slept that a handful of lucky inmates got to relax over a cup of coffee while on kitchen detail. I like my mornings quiet. I mean, it was okay to hear the coffee percolating and dripping, but that was about it. Prison is so loud, when it's silent, you can hear thoughts, sometimes all at once. But in the kitchen, thoughts were muted. There was only one thing that stood out as unusual about that morning. It was the lack of dead crickets. I mean, usually around that time of year, the cricket carcasses were all over the walk, and for that matter, in the dorms. And have you ever smelled thousands of dead crickets? It's like smelling a graveyard of the unburied. It's something you never really get accustomed to. Anyway, I remember thinking how glad I was not to be crunching dead crickets under my feet on the way to the kitchen. Everything from then on was normal until it wasn't. I was sipping my coffee and sitting across from me was the kid. He was sipping his own coffee. We weren't talking or anything, just sitting in our thoughts, like I've already said. He was only on kitchen detail for the last few months. Cool kid, really. He told me he had a beautiful girl waiting for him and she was pregnant with his child. He only had a few years on his sentence and seemed like he would be in and out before he knew it. I could see his eyes when it happened. Our eyes locked for a moment, for that single moment, and then pieces of his face were all over me, and his blood was in my mouth mixed with coffee. It was a salty, bitter taste. That's what I thought after he was slumped across the table from me. His hand was still wrapped around his coffee cup. His fingers were twitching, and then the blood just poured everywhere. He didn't even get out a scream. His eyes were so loud, though, as if he knew in an instant it was all over. I can see it, his whole life, as it flashed through his eyes. His girl, his child, and his life. And that look that was so confounded and confused. Maybe I'm remembering wrong, but have you ever tried to replay a morning cup of coffee and some poor kid's face is all over you? I didn't realize it was a meat cleaver until after. I don't remember seeing the meat cleaver, or old Bob for that matter. I just saw the kid's eyes. His eyes. Bob was getting out in a few months. I mean, we all knew he was a little throwed off, a little crazy. You know, he had a bunch of difficulties in his mind. He was always rambling and mumbling under his breath. But no one could have predicted he'd kill a kid. No one. You couldn't have asked a single inmate in that kitchen detail if they thought old Bob would lose his screws and kill some poor kid, or anybody for that matter. I remember after the initial investigation from the warden and detectives, they said that Bob had made up his mind months earlier and he didn't want to go home. You know, he was about to be released. He made sure he wasn't going to go home, though. He had concocted a plan that was going to keep him in prison for the rest of his life where he wanted to be. I can't believe it. If I would have been sitting where the kid was, it would have been my head with the meat cleaver in it. It would have been me. Because they said Bob wasn't partial on a victim that morning. He was going to just hit the first person he seen. And it just so happened to be the poor kid. I mean, we were in a minimum security prison, and just like that. A minimum security prison where everyone was going home someday, even old Bob. There's no mental evaluations on who you're sitting next to in prison. So how could anyone have known that old Bob was a certified paranoid schizophrenic? Last I heard, he was transferred to the state prison. Maximum security, of course. And now he's on lockdown 24 hours a day. But that doesn't do the kid any good. A minor drug charge, and somehow the state sentenced the poor kid to death. Just like the crickets. It's eerie, really. But now the smell of fresh coffee and dead crickets are indistinguishable to me. In fact, I taste blood when I drink coffee now, but it doesn't matter. Because I'm on an old Bluebird bus headed to the state prison, and I'm looking forward to seeing old Bob again.